I'm a therapist who specializes in addiction. Have been for quite some time, and probably still will be for years to come. But something happened in 2010 that made me question if I wanted to remain in the field. If I ever wanted to interact with another human being at all. I'm not going to give my name or location, or the name of the patient due to privacy guidelines that I'm currently breaking. I've kept this story inside of me for years now, and it's time someone else knew. And it was time for my 1 p.m. appointment. Reception called and said the patient will be walking in momentarily. I thanked her and waited. The patient, a young man I will refer to as John, who had a problem with methamphetamines and PCP, walked in looking severely distraught. His clothes were a mess, dirty and torn to shreds in some places. His eyes were deeply sunken into his skull, with bags underneath them darker than midnight. His lips were dry and cracked. His nose was running, with blood caked at the bottom of his nostrils. It looked to me like going through a severe case of withdrawal. "You're not looking too hot, John." "No shit," he replied as he sat down slowly. "Are you withdrawing? How long has it been?" "I don't know what it is. I fired up about 2 hours ago." "Was it your regular drug of choice?" I asked, puzzled. "Yeah, but I got it from a new guy and it's some bullshit. I don't even feel like I'm withdrawing. I don't know what I feel like." "Do you need medical attention?" I asked, hoping he would take the offer. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His jaw just hung down. And then it opened further and further, until his jaw unhinged. The skin on his cheeks began to tear, sending blood dripping onto my carpet. I gasped and said something, I don't even remember what it was, as he stood up from his chair. His jaw continued lowering until his bottom lip touched his throat. A small hand came from deep within him and pulled his upper lip up over his nose. The hand retreated back from whence it came, and John's head cocked back, sending his jaw up. As it lowered again, John's teeth were no longer that of a human. He had a series of different-sized fangs protruding through his gums. They were rotten and cracking, with an instantly noticeable odor. His head dropped forward and his tongue fell out of his mouth, before inching back into it as if someone were pulling on it like a rope from the other end. I was absolutely frozen in terror. I didn't want to move, in fear that whatever John was now would try to stop me. I didn't want to startle it by yelling. I just had to sit there and watch. The same hand from earlier reached far out of John's mouth and grabbed a handful of his tattered t-shirt. With one pull, the shirt ripped off of him, revealing John's scarred and bruised torso. After the arm once again retracted, I saw something pulsating inside of his stomach, moving around. Suddenly, a clawed, red finger poked out of his belly button, then another, and another, and finally a thumb and wrist, revealing a 4-fingered hand on a tiny, slender wrist that looked as if it would break from a gust of wind. It was the opposite arm that had been coming through John's mouth. The arm came out past the wrist, and the other arm returned from his mouth. It was then that John fell like a stiff board onto his back, the arms flailing wildly as he descended to the ground. Just then, his ribs on the left side of his body began moving, further apart and closer together, as if they were being stretched and then moving back to position. It was then that I heard a loud crack, a sound I will never forget, and a hoofed foot tore through the lower side of his torso, squirming around looking for the ground. Closer to his heart now came another crack, this one louder than the first, and another hoof came bursting through his skin, desperately trying to find ground to stand on. I watched on in horror as the four extremities flailed about on my office floor, desperately seeking some kind of stability. Then I heard a series of cracks, quieter than the ones that had flooded my ears. Each rib cracked on his right side, one after the other. His skin raised on his side at 2 points, as if they were trying to get through the skin. And they did. 2 horns protruded from his side. The skin between the horns stretched as the rest of the head attempted to free itself, before finally bursting open and revealing its hideous face. It had 4 smaller horns between the 2 primary ones, jet black eyes without eyelids. They looked like 2 marbles had been crafted from darkness itself. Its nose was a snout like that of a pig, only it was much smaller than a pig's nose. Its mouth resembled what John's had been turned into, only it contained more rows of the horrible, vile, rotten teeth, and its breath filled my office with a near palpable odor that threatened to make me vomit. It looked around for a moment, seemingly taking in its whereabouts. It must have noticed it was on the floor, because it suddenly used its hands to push itself up onto its feet. It couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall in its entirety. As it stood, John's body simply dangled, hanging to the sides. I couldn't tell what the monster's actual torso looked like, as the bulk of its body was actually John's stomach and chest area. It looked directly at me, gazing into my eyes, seemingly staring into my soul. I blinked, and in that split second, the monster and John's lifeless body that it was inside of turned around and dove through the second-floor window of my office. I quickly got up and ran to look over the edge. They had landed in the bushes below. The monster bursted through the rest of John, then did something I can't properly explain with words. Whatever it did, it healed the majority of John's wounds instantly. He still had cuts and scrapes and bruises on his body, but nothing about him would suggest that some sort of monster had just been born from within him. And with that, the monster scurried away, dragging its much longer left arm behind it. The police were called, and after seeing John up close, I decided not to tell them what had just happened. I told them he had mentioned feeling suicidal and subsequently jumped through my window. I don't know what the fuck it was. I don't know how the fuck it came to be. I don't know what the fuck it wanted or what the fuck it's doing right now. All I know is that it's fucking out there, somewhere, doing God knows what. John and I still see each other. He cleaned himself up for a while, but eventually fell back into his addiction. We spoke about what had happened that day, as if he truly had mentioned feeling suicidal and attempted to take his own life. But today, he mentioned the monster. 6 years ago, he was conscious for the whole thing, and he saw him for the first time last night.